For decades, whispers circulated in the corridors of Pentecostal churches, gospel ministries, and behind the stained glass windows of religious empires. Some stories remained rumors, others turned into scandals. But one tale, buried, silenced, and pushed into secrecy, has finally resurfaced: the alleged clash between Frances Swaggart, the Iron Lady of the Swaggart dynasty, and the late David Wilkerson, one of America's most respected evangelists. Now, after years of carefully measured words and calculated silence, Frances has supposedly let the truth slip. Sources close to the ministry claim she never forgave Wilkerson for one act, an act so sharp, so wounding, that it left a scar she carried throughout her life. And today, the world is asking, what really happened between Frances Swaggart and David Wilkerson? The Swaggart legacy, power, fame, and scandal. Before diving into the clash, we need to understand the empire Frances built with her husband, Jimmy Swaggart. The 1980s saw Jimmy Swaggart rise to become one of the most influential televangelists in the world. His fiery sermons, tear-filled altar calls, and televised crusades drew millions. But behind that pulpit, Frances was no silent partner. She wasn't just the preacher's wife. She was the strategist, the enforcer, the manager. Frances controlled finances. Frances directed the television network. Frances managed Jimmy's public image. Frances knew how to wield power. While Jimmy became the face of the ministry, Frances became the backbone. Together, they were unstoppable, until scandals, sins, and enemies shook their world. And one of those enemies, she claimed, was none other than David Wilkerson. Who was David Wilkerson? The street preacher who changed America. David Wilkerson was not the type to blend in with the crowd. Unlike the flashy televangelists of his era, he didn't crave luxury cars or multi-million-dollar mansions. His calling was different. In 1958, he left his small-town pastorate in Pennsylvania and went to New York City. There, among gang members and addicts, he founded Teen Challenge, a ministry dedicated to rescuing drug addicts from the streets. His book, The Cross and the Switchblade, became a global bestseller, inspiring millions. Wilkerson was bold, unafraid, and often confrontational. He would call out sin, even in high places, and that made him both admired and feared. For Frances Swaggart, Wilkerson wasn't just another preacher. He was a man whose words, actions, and warnings would eventually cut deep into the Swaggart empire. The clash that sparked a lifetime of bitterness. According to insiders, the root of the clash began in the 1970s when Wilkerson allegedly confronted the Swaggarts about hypocrisy within the ministry. Some say he criticized Jimmy's lavish lifestyle. Others claim he accused Frances of being more of a businesswoman than a woman of God. A few whisper that he warned them about scandals before they ever came to light. Whatever the case, Frances never forgave him. In private conversations, she reportedly referred to Wilkerson as a man who judged without mercy. Some even claim she believed Wilkerson tried to destroy their ministry's credibility. While Jimmy may have brushed off such confrontations, Frances held on, decades later. Even after Wilkerson's death in 2011, she allegedly couldn't speak of him without a sharp edge in her voice. Why the silence lasted so long? If the clash was so deep, why didn't Frances speak openly? The answer lies in survival. The Swaggart empire faced multiple storms. Jimmy's infamous 1988 scandal with a prostitute. The 1991 follow-to-up scandal that nearly destroyed the ministry. Endless criticism from both secular media and rival preachers. With so much public humiliation already circling, Frances couldn't afford to add another feud into the spotlight. So, she did what she always did best. She stayed silent, controlling the narrative and protecting the family brand. But insiders say that behind closed doors, her bitterness toward Wilkerson never faded. The breaking point: Frances speaks out. Now, decades later, Frances has reportedly let her guard down. In a private conversation caught on recording, a conversation that mysteriously leaked, she finally exposed her long-held resentment. According to the leaked words, David Wilkerson, he was no saint. He stood against us when he should have stood with us. He judged me, judged Jimmy, and he tried to break what God was building. People call him a prophet, but I knew his spirit, and I'll say it till my dying breath. He wounded me more than anyone ever did. If true, this statement reveals the raw truth. Frances saw Wilkerson not as a fellow servant of God, but as a lifelong adversary. Why this revelation shocks the church? The clash between Frances and Wilkerson isn't just about two personalities. It represents the deeper divide within the evangelical world. The street prophet versus the televangelist Wilkerson represented purity, sacrifice, and raw evangelism. Frances represented structure, power, and influence. The voice of warning versus the voice of authority. Wilkerson warned about corruption. Francis maintained authority over a billion-dollar empire. The clash of legacies. Even in death, Wilkerson is remembered as a prophet. Francis, meanwhile, remains a polarizing figure. This revelation reopens old wounds and forces the church world to ask, who was truly right? In the hidden corners of evangelical history, some testimonies suggest that David Wilkerson didn't just criticize the Swaggarts, he warned them. According to several sources close to both ministries, Wilkerson allegedly told Jimmy and Francis during the mid-1970s, "If you build your house on fame, it will crumble. If you build it on money, it will rot. But if you build it on holiness, it will stand." At the time, Jimmy was enjoying his rise to fame. Francis was already managing the financial backbone of their empire. Instead of receiving Wilkerson's words as a warning, insiders claim Francis took them as an insult. To her, this was not a prophecy. It was a direct attack, one that questioned her role as the keeper of the ministry's wealth. And when Jimmy's scandals in the late 1980s rocked the world, Francis reportedly muttered to a close confidant, "That man cursed us before the world ever did." The bitterness had rooted itself deep. Francis versus Wilkerson, a clash of worlds. Why did their conflict cut so deep? The answer lies in their radically different calling. David Wilkerson's world: dark alleys, drug addicts, gang members, broken lives. His ministry was raw, unpolished, and soaked in sacrifice. He wore simple clothes, drove modest cars, and spent nights praying in weeping churches instead of TV studios. Francis Swaggart's world: bright stage lights, polished sermons, global television networks. She dealt with contracts, donor lists, and production crews. The ministry was not just a pulpit, it was an empire. When these two worlds collided, it was inevitable that sparks would fly. Wilkerson saw Francis as overly political, more businesswoman than preacher's wife. Francis saw Wilkerson as reckless, self-righteous, and an enemy of organized evangelism. Their feud wasn't just personal, it represented the spiritual civil war within Christianity itself. Behind closed doors, Francis's fury. Those who worked closely with Francis over the decades say that she rarely forgave anyone who crossed her. She had a steel-like memory, and when it came to David Wilkerson, her words were often biting. An ex-staffer recalls her saying, "People worship him like he's some saint. They didn't see what I saw. He looked Jimmy in the eyes and told him he'd fall. Who does that? Who tears down another minister before the people?" In Francis's mind, Wilkerson wasn't simply a preacher, he was a threat. A man who tried to dismantle everything she had fought to build alongside Jimmy. The silence after Wilkerson's death. In 2011, David Wilkerson died tragically in a car crash in Texas. Across the Christian world, tributes poured in. Leaders hailed him as a prophet, a giant, a man of unwavering holiness. But one tribute never came. Francis Swaggart never publicly honored Wilkerson. She didn't release a statement. She didn't acknowledge his legacy. She stayed silent. For many, her silence spoke louder than words. It was the silence of a wound never healed. Why Francis is speaking now? So why break the silence now? After decades, some insiders point to three key reasons. Age and reflection. At over 80 years old, Francis knows her time on earth is shorter than before. She reportedly wants to settle old accounts before she meets her maker. Control of the narrative. With Jimmy aging and Donnie stepping into the spotlight, Francis may feel that the ministry's story is slipping from her control. Revealing the feud allows her to reclaim her version of events. Bitterness that never died. Above all, insiders claim she simply couldn't let go. For Francis, Wilkerson's words weren't just criticism, they were betrayal. And now, she wants the world to know. The fallout, how the church world reacts. News of Francis's alleged comments about Wilkerson has shaken many. Some reactions include: supporters of Francis say she's finally speaking her truth after being silent too long. They argue that Wilkerson was not beyond criticism, and that even prophets can wound others unfairly. Supporters of Wilkerson are furious. To them, he was a holy man whose life of sacrifice stands in stark contrast to the scandals that engulf the Swaggarts. For Francis to criticize him now feels like bitterness speaking louder than truth. Neutral voices see it as a tragic story of two strong personalities who never reconciled, a reminder of how pride and division can scar even the most powerful ministry. The hidden letters. Adding fuel to the fire, there are whispers of letters Wilkerson may have written to the Swaggarts in the 1980s. These letters allegedly contain sharp warnings about corruption, temptation, and falling away from holiness. Some claim Francis had them locked away, refusing to let the public see them. If those letters ever surface, they could rewrite the narrative of this entire clash. Legacy at stake. This revelation raises a haunting question. What will Francis's legacy be? To some, she will remain the queen of the Swaggart Empire, powerful, unbending, and unshakable. To others, she will be remembered as a bitter woman who could never forgive the one man who dared to confront her ministry. In contrast, Wilkerson's legacy continues to shine. His book The Cross and the Switchblade still sells. Teen Challenge still rescues addicts worldwide. His sermons, filled with trembling warnings, still circulate online as if they were recorded yesterday. The clash between Francis and Wilkerson may have been personal, but history seems to favor one over the other. The final confession. In what may be her last word on the matter, Francis reportedly confessed pride. Maybe I should have forgiven him. Maybe I should have let it go. But I didn't. He hurt me too deep, and I'll never forget it. It's a haunting confession, one that reveals not just anger, but also regret. Conclusion. A tale of two giants. The story of Francis Swaggart and David Wilkerson is not just about two names in church history. It's about pride, wounds, forgiveness, and the dangers of silence. For decades, Francis carried her bitterness in secret. Now, with her words exposed, the world sees the cost of unresolved conflict. And in the end, one truth remains. David Wilkerson is gone, remembered as a prophet. Francis Swaggart is still here, remembered as a fighter. But when history writes its final chapter, the question will echo forever. Did Francis expose Wilkerson, or did she expose herself? In the shadows of revival tents and the glare of television spotlights, the clash between Francis Swaggart and David Wilkerson becomes more than history. It becomes a warning. Ministries rise and fall, leaders clash, but the wounds they leave behind often outlive them. As Francis nears the twilight of her life, her unhealed bitterness reminds us that silence can be as heavy as scandal. And for those who watched both giants walk the stage of history, one question lingers and whispers. What if forgiveness had won instead of pride?